let's talk about revisions. You have an assignment that we're working on, and remember there are 4 steps in the writing process. Step number 1 is pre-writing. Step number 2 is rough draft. Those are 2 different steps, by the way, for those of you who haven't caught that yet. The third step is revisions, and remember that in English, revisions means changes. So we're going to change some things on our papers, and then we're going to write final draft. Okay, for the purposes of making a grade on revisions, that's worth 7 points on your prontuario. What I'm going to do is have you write changes on your rough draft and mark 7 changes. Okay, so I want you to mark those revisions on your rough draft. Do you see where I've got things in red on the board? That's where I have marked changes on my notes here. And I will go through this step by step to make sure that you understand. Mark changes and number 6 of those changes. Actually, I want you to number 7 of those changes. Okay. Just realized I wrote the word 6 instead of 7. Anyway. So number 1 is the trait of ideas. You need to have enough ideas to have an essay. You need to have enough detail to make your essay interesting and specific, you know. So you can add a detail or an example, like statistics or names, etc. So what I did was I made a little caret, and that's what you call the little pointy thing down here. The caret goes on the bottom and it points up at something on the top that you want to add. So I'm gonna make a caret, and above the line, that's one reason we skip lines. Above the line, I'm gonna write what I want to add, and then I'm writing a little number 1 with a circle around it to show that this is an ideas change that I'm making. Or another idea is to take out unnecessary repetition. If you cross out something that you repeated, then you can count that as a number 1 change. So, for example, I had a student a year or 2 ago who kept writing essays using synonyms. He would say, shut the gate or portal to something. And I'm sorry, but that's the first synonyms I thought of. You need seasoning, which is to say salt and especias. And that's okay once in a while, but if the entire paper has a bunch of synonyms in it, all you're doing is trying to pad the number of words, and it's quite obvious. Yeah, so take out any unnecessary repetition. That could be a number 1 change. A number 2 change is to change the order of sentences, words, or paragraphs, or mark where your paragraphs breaks are going to be. So I've done one little change here, and I've drawn a double-headed arrow to show that I want to change the order of the word sentences and the word words. And I've put a little number 2 there to show that this is a number 2 change. Or mark where your paragraphs are going to be, paragraph breaks are going to be. Normally when students write rough drafts, it's hard or impossible to know where they plan to put their paragraph breaks, because you're already skipping lines. You tend to not skip an extra one where there's going to be a new paragraph. And for some reason, it's been difficult for me to teach students to indent for paragraphs. And we'll talk about that later. But if you can't find anything that you need to change the order of, like 2 sentences, 2 words, oh, this sentence would be better up here, anything like that, then you could just mark where your paragraph breaks are going to be. Where does your conclusion begin, for example? Number 3 Change anything that sounds confusing or is patronizing. Maybe ask a friend or a parent. But sometimes we think that we're explaining something really well when there's parts of it that we've left out because we kind of assume everyone knows that. If you haven't noticed, there are things that today's generation of young people knows that my generation may not know. I always make the joke that if there's something wrong with my computer, I need to ask someone under 25 to look at it. Or something wrong with my cell phone, or something wrong with the radio in the car, or whatever. Because you guys seem to have a handle on these technological things that maybe people in my generation don't always have. So you need to make sure to explain things, but not make your audience feel stupid. Or feel like you think they're stupid. Because you probably don't think your audience is stupid. Okay, so you could put a number 3 by that kind of change. Number 4, correct your English usage. So if you put the word in, but really what you mean is on, then that would be an English usage issue. If you didn't put the subject of your sentence, because in Spanish you wouldn't need to, but you have to add that, that's an English usage issue. Or you could change a general or boring word to something better. Use action verbs if you can. That's another one. The change that I marked here is I crossed out the word better and I used a phrase that's better, more specific. Because better doesn't necessarily tell me much, but more specific tells you more. Use action verbs if you can. Many times people use a lot of the words is and are and stuff like that. And, it might be grammatically correct, but it's more interesting to read something with action verbs. Number 4, correct your English usage. Okay, we did that. And I showed you an example. And number 5, correct run-on sentences, comma splices, rambling sentences, or fragments. All those sentence problems, if you know how to correct those. Or put a 2 or 3 word sentence next to a long, complex sentence. Those can be counted as sentence fluency types of corrections. So put a little number 5 if you have a whole paragraph where you didn't put periods, but you go back and you put periods in there to show where one sentence ends and the next one begins. That is a number 5 kind of correction. Put a little number 5 next to it. Number 6, correct subject-verb agreement errors. Okay, so we had a section in our grammar on subject-verb agreement. Make sure that when you use the word when you use a verb, that the subject agrees with it. Or when you use a subject, that the verb agrees with it. So for example, if you said, he don't have to do that, that is a subject-verb agreement problem. And if you change the word don't, mark that out, and you put the word doesn't instead, then that is a correction of subject-verb agreement. And you can put a little number 6 next to that. Number 7, add commas where needed, please. So here, there would need to be a comma here, so I put a little caret down here pointing up to a comma, and I put the number 7. We just had a section in our grammar about commas, so I will be looking for your commas to be used appropriately and to be not used when you don't need them. Let's see, so I made that little correction. So you can see how you're marking numbers. You only need to mark one comma error correction with a number 7. Don't mark a little number 7 next to every single one of those. And that goes for all of these. But if you find nothing to correct in one of these areas, you may substitute. So if you think all of your commas are perfect and you don't need to take any out or put any in, then you're missing something. So you can mark another number 4, or you can mark another number 2, or whatever. but only do that once. So I will be looking for, on your paper, I will be looking for a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, a number 4, a number 5, a number 6, a number 7. And you could possibly have a 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. See what I mean? And then also here, keep the revisions assignment and your final draft in mind and correct as many errors as you can find, not only 7. Okay, so for the purposes of this revisions assignment, you only need to mark 7 corrections with the little numbers, okay? But remember that you are making corrections on your rough draft in order to have a better final draft. And so if there are a lot of spelling errors, go ahead and correct them. If there are a lot of run-on sentences, don't just correct one, correct all of them if you can. Yeah, so you're doing kind of 2 things at once. You're improving your essay and you're fulfilling this revisions assignment. If you hand me, I'm still thinking in person. If you turn in on Google Classroom your revisions, but there are no numbers on it, I will not grade it. Okay? And if you don't ever correct that, even though I ask you to, and even maybe send a note to your parents, and you never correct that, you will get a 0. Because your assignment is to mark. The assignment is to mark these numbers where you need those kinds of changes. And if you don't do that, then you have not done the assignment. I hope you understand. Okay. And then after you've done that, you do your final draft. Make sure on your final draft that it is very neat. Make sure on your final draft that I can read it. Both of these things, I need to read the corrections that you made. I need to see whether it's a number 4 or a number 7. And if it's very light or it's very messy, I will not be able to see it. So make sure I can. On your final draft, make sure that you've written in either black or blue ink or some kind of something that's dark, if you have a dark pencil, okay? So that when I look at it, I will be able to read it. Also, make sure that your paragraphs show. You should not have just one block of writing. It should be broken into paragraphs, and I talked about that during the first video. So, yeah, make sure I can tell where one paragraph ends and the next one begins. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, and I've had a few people ask how many sentences. If I don't say how many sentences something should be, and I don't give you a number of words or pages or anything like that, you can assume that somewhere between 15 and 25 sentences is fine. I don't really want to read a long essay, but I do want to see enough that I know that you know how to do all these things and how to break things into paragraphs according to your plan. So let me know if there are any questions in the comments, and that's it, I believe. Happy writing.